Okay, welcome everyone to the 4DMethod 4D user group. Today is August 19th. This is meeting number 45. Thanks for joining us. Hope you all are staying healthy and safe out there. It's a bit of a crazy world right now, so sometimes it feels like a luxury to take a moment and hang out and talk 4D for a little while. So let's get it started. Today I'm gonna go ahead and repeat my my description of what we're trying to do here with 4DMethod, and then we'll get some news from 4D with Jem Sobczak, and then we'll have some highlights from the 4D blog. Always a whole ton of interesting material quickly coming out on the blog there, keeping pace with the development of new features at 4D. We'll chat a little bit about the new 4D open source group that has formed recently. And then we'll have our special topic presenter. We'll welcome back Dani Beaubien, and he'll talk a little bit about his modern component for reading delimited text files. We'll have our questions and answers and talk about our next meeting on October 7th, 2020. The famed year, horrid year of 2020. But hopefully we'll make it better one way or another. So my name is Brent Raymond. I organize the 4DMethod 4D user group. Our website is at 4dmethod.com, and we can be reached at 4dmethod@gmail.com. What we're trying to do here is to bring together a scattered community of developers and users all around the world. There's very many of us out there, and it's always nice to check in with developers around the globe. We use video conferencing, such as Zoom, along with everyone else and all of the school children, for meetings to allow people to participate from anywhere. And all of our meetings are recorded, and the presentations are recorded and are available going back for years on the 4DMethod YouTube channel. So check it out. What we're trying to do is just to provide a platform and a community basis for a community for sharing new content and exposure for users and developers of 4D applications everywhere. So that's my blurb. I'm going to pass the mic over to Jem just to talk a little bit about what's going on with 4D themselves.
Thank you, Brent. And an interesting blurb it was. I think you're succeeding in all the points that you had listed. So greetings everyone from 4D. As Brent mentioned, I hope you're all staying safe and healthy in this environment. Our thanks to Brent for continuing to organize these meetings, lining up interesting presenters. I'm sure we're all looking forward to Dani's presentation on a modern component for reading delimited text files today. We all know Dani's components are useful, well-written, well-supported, so I'm sure this is another in that line. A brief update on the goings-on at 4D. Of course, in the US and California here, where 4D is located, we're all still working from home. A few of us are going into the office for essential tasks only. On the other hand, our colleagues at 4D France and 4D Germany are back in their offices. That seemed to be going well. They've been there for several weeks now, and yeah, so that's going well. Here in the US, we all feel fortunate, I'm sure everyone on this call, to be in an industry where we can work from home and still be productive. And speaking of that, from a business perspective, Q2 for 4D was very strong, both in the US and at 4D globally. So thanks to you, our developers, for continuing to purchase upgrades, to renew your maintenance, to buy new software, etc. Most of our OEMs, vertical market developers, and large customers are posting strong numbers for Q2. We've mentioned this many times at the summit, where we sell into a variety of vertical markets. Our biggest one is healthcare. And as you can imagine, the healthcare industry is doing extremely well right now, doing lab tests, etc. and they're posting good numbers, and it's good for 4D in return. So customer communications, as Brent mentioned, all better than they usually are. We continue to wear out our Zoom accounts, our Zoom webinar accounts, and now it just becomes second nature for all of us, I'm sure, to do that. The 4D professional services team is staying busy, helping developers to upgrade to V18, do conversions from 4D Write to 4D Write Pro, mobile and web development. So if you as a developer are in need of another hand, don't hesitate to call our team. Just an update on the Summit digital experience. We've now had well over 3,500, that's 3,500 unique views of the Summit material, which is awesome. It's a much broader audience than we would have reached at the Summits in combination in Europe and in the US. So I think if there's a bright side to not being able to see people face to face, it's the fact that we were able to spread out the audience for the Summit. The average watch time of each individual presentation is also growing, which means to me anyway that developers are finding reasons to watch these sessions and upgrade to V18. And they're watching them in their entirety, which is really a good sign for me. There are 45 breakout sessions, 40 hours of video recordings. Recently, we added subtitles in Spanish and Portuguese. So hopefully you're able to watch a lot of those Summit presentations. If you're only able to watch a couple of them, please do watch the opening keynotes, the business keynotes, and Laurent Hainaut's and Laurent Labardier's sessions. Those are super critical in talking about where we're going with our product. Software releases in the long-term support cycle, version 18.2, hotfix 2 was released yesterday. You know, many of you are either developing in version 18 or have actually released version 18 into production. It's a good sign of your confidence in our early releases of new versions of 4D. I can report that our single largest installation of 4D at Sweetwater did upgrade to version 18.2 about 10 days ago. They did it overnight. The next day, they hooked up 800 concurrent users right away in the morning, and everything went very smoothly. There were no hiccups at all. So Jeff Kane and his team were very happy about that. In the feature release cycle, the version 18R3 is the current release version of feature release. That was released in the 3rd week of July. And version 18R4 is in beta. So if you're following the blog, I know Brent is going to mention a lot of the features that are in version 18R4. Lots of new advancements in 4D Write Pro, 4D View Pro, 4D for iOS, Orta. There's much more there. So if you can't put these feature releases into production for one reason or another, I understand a lot of people can't upgrade that often, then please do follow the features that are on blog.4d.com. And a couple more points, discuss.4d.com. Many thanks to all of you who have moved your discussions, your threads, your questions to discuss.4d.com. I thought it happened really quickly. I thought it was pretty seamless, the way it all transpired, and the support we're getting from the community and also from 4D engineers and our tech support team is very inspiring. Of course, the NUG is still open. It's just not getting a lot of traffic right now. And then finally, also another point that Brent will talk about, Thomas Mall's presentation on project mode, which was 2 weeks ago today. Very well attended. We had over 100 registrations for this event, which made us a bit nervous because our Zoom webinar limit is only 100. So we had like 103 people who were still signing up, but as is usual, some people are not able to attend, and that happened here. A few folks weren't able to make the meeting. So we ended up with 73 attendees, which is really good for a Zoom webinar. Most of those people who did participate stayed for the entire 75-minute presentation and the 45-minute Q&A. Thomas Mall had vowed beforehand to answer every question that was in the queue, and he did. He stuck around for a solid 2 hours and answered every question that was there. So that recording is now online for all who participated. And that was free for 4D partners, as you know. We'll be doing more of these and a variety of presenters and topics in the near future. So that's all for me, Brent. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. That was quite a thorough update from you guys. There's just a lot going on, and I did attend the online training as well. And boy, was there just a whole very dense amount of information there. And for any 4D developer, it's something not to miss if you're going to project mode. I mean, project mode reminds me a little bit of the leap to V11 to some degree after hearing the amount of changes under the hood that happens along the way. And so it's quite a big deal, and especially a big deal if you'll be using classes, which is one of the big changes in R3 and also in moving on to R4 in version 18, which is just a huge deal, and again was covered in the videos from the summit, which are not to be missed, because it really represents the future of 4D application development one way or another. So anyways, thanks again. And just another note for online training, there was a really wonderful video that was put up by Tiran. Anybody correct me on the name? I should have gotten that.
That's correct, Tiran.
Right. With creating a simple timestamp class in 4D using classes and whatnot, and it's just really beautifully put together. It's got nice background music, and and typing is pleasant to watch, sped up even, and it's something. It's interesting to see the reaction with R3 and upcoming version of R4. How the community is embracing the classes and already starting to adapt other open source libraries to classes, and that's I think it's an adoption of a new feature of 4D that is happening at some kind of record speed. I don't know if it's a real record, but it's happening quickly. In any case, it's a very nice demo to watch, and beyond that, we have other great information for learning 4D and for understanding the new features and seeing what's coming out in R4. One of the big highlights from recent blog articles is that certain pro list box features are now free. Now, namely the ones that were listed specifically by this article. And if there's any other specific features, perhaps Jim can let us know about that. But the ones that were called out in the article was automatic row height in list boxes, which is really groovy, something that is a real attraction for, has been a real attraction for using 4D view and whatnot, and it's not possible using the standard list boxes before R4. Also, the using object arrays. Now, what that allows you to do is to have each different cell within a list box have some really specific functionality. It's commonly noted that the property list editor in the design environment in 4D basically uses the same functionality, so that you can add buttons within cells. You can have one be a checkbox, another one be a drop-down list, and be able to have each cell be its own almost little subform for functionality, which is again definitely a welcome feature that they're offering to the public or to developers for using R4 and moving forward to 19. So that's pretty cool. That's a big deal. Also, we have other developments in R4. The functionality with collection-based list boxes, collection and entity selection-based list boxes, to set up movable rows just by a checkbox. I don't know if Guy is in the meeting today, but I'm certain that he will find that feature interesting. Because it can be a bit harrowing to do that programmatically, but now it's just a checkbox and or a property you can set by code in a collection / entity selection based list box. The new declaration syntax for an intuitive auto completion article is huge. That's again going into R4 and having your own custom classes in 4D. You have a new way to declare your variables, which if you go that direction with your variable, the variable can actually be typed as a class, and the development environment will pop you up with a list of the functions that are available within that class. So that's before now. It was sort of anybody's guess what was going to happen what would pop up when you hit dot and the autocomplete, what it was going to show you. But now it's much tighter to develop with, and it's really will make it far nicer to work in that manner if you're using classes. Again, only available if you're using that syntax of declaration. And then another great module that has been added into the standard 4D library, along with the modules like file and folder, and well, now we have crypto key, which gives you the ability to encrypt and decrypt and sign and verify all using native 4D language. And if you're dealing with anything with high security, perhaps, especially if you are having to adhere to the higher security regulations in Europe and beyond, then this is going to be a real welcome change for exchanging messaging and communications and whatnot out on the web and elsewhere. Encryption is fantastic as part of our landscape and writing modern applications, and so it's great to see this in the standard 4D library. And I'd like to sort of say a little bit. I'll just mention it, but there's been a really great new development out in the 4D community. The beginnings of a 4D open source group, which is just a group who has started sharing their library, their code repositories, got to get the nomenclature right here, on GitHub. And there's a few repositories already, as you can see, listed on here. I very much expect that list to grow. Some people that you would be familiar with, namely one of them being Dani, our presenter for today, and Kirk, who has presented several times to the group, and also Guy Algut, who's part of the sort of founding group, as well as Cannon Smith. They're all coming together to provide a vision for sharing code effectively via GitHub. Which is now we can integrate much easier with the project mode of 4D applications, and new classes, which makes it a really tight way to integrate to share code, because you can include all of the functions and logic in one text file, and so it's a huge attraction for starting to migrate not only to project mode, but also to start familiarizing yourself with classes. and as well starting to really work more with components, because as we saw with Thomas Mau's demonstration, moving older databases and larger applications to project mode is not going to be quite for the faint of heart. It might be far easier to break off chunks of your code and modules and make components of them and make them modern, and perhaps even replace them with shared components from the open source community for such things like handling tab delimited files, perhaps, and file folders. And in order to handle all these new libraries that we're going to be able to take advantage of, which is really, it will be a tremendous advantage for us developers once we start moving this forward and get more participation from the community. Dani's put forward a suggestion, a map of, and I'll let him speak to it a little bit more about how to, a module or a library for handling 4D packages. For anyone who's used more Linux and open source communities will be well familiar with having a package manager. Well, that helps to make sure that you have the most up-to-date versions of the components that you're using. It helps you to find the components that you need for certain purposes, and just really helps to be a foundation and a source of sanity for the whole environment. So that's, it's exciting to see all of this, these efforts beginning and starting to take shape out there on GitHub. And sorry, I didn't mean to steal Dani's thunder too much, but one of the couple of the early libraries are what we're going to share today, what Dani's going to show us. Dani's been working with 4D since the early 90s. He has extensive, I wouldn't say expensive, how can I say that, perhaps, experience building web and client server applications for a variety of industries. In the past decade or so, he's been focused on using 4D to build web-based and vertical market applications that support hundreds of concurrent users. He brought us the code analysis component and the code coverage component in previous years and demos on 4DMethod. And so today he's going to show us a little bit about his component for reading delimited text files. So welcome back to the 4DMethod spotlight, Dani.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Brent.
Yeah.
Do I have control now?
I will stop sharing, and then you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. Excellent. I guess before I do that, I just wanted to talk about the 4D open source stuff. The goal, part of it is to try and work out a way that you can have open source code for the 4D, especially with the project mode coming up, in a way that it's easy to find, because there's a lot of developers out there that are sharing code here and there on their own websites or on GitHub, but it's hard to find, or else you have to create this giant bookmark list of things. So that package manager is just kind of a thought exercise on mechanisms for doing that. Maybe it's some of the projects and repositories are hosted directly on 4D open source, and then maybe there's a curated list of just where we keep track of other repositories that people have shared, and then we just organize, just someplace to go. It's just something that a few of us have talked about for a long time, and so I figured I'd just try and see if we can get something going. Particularly with the classes now, the timestamp class that was just recently posted the video, that's a perfect single file class that probably most of us will end up writing. So why reinvent the wheel? So it'll be interesting to see how it works out over time. Yeah. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. Good. Can you see my screen? Okay, good. I'll close the chat window and you can just let me know if there's any questions.
Sure.
So what I want to talk about today is a couple components that I wrote that are particularly targeted at handling tab delimited files or comma delimited files. Our situation is that people send us data to be either imported directly or updating existing data. And we've had problems, particularly where the clients that are sending the files, we can't count on column order. We can't count on the columns being present. Sometimes they'll add columns, sometimes they'll remove columns, and we can't count on them being CSV or tab delimited. So it's been a real chore trying to work through that. So this is one of the older methods. So this is me trying to deal with columns being there or not there. And so I end up having to do these fancy little things where I'm loading the headers into an array and then looking to find out and then using variables to find out if they actually exist or not. And then later on when I'm actually processing, I'm having to test every time to see, you know, was the column there, was the column, wasn't the column there, which is fine and dandy, but what we found is that then I would have to come back and make a change. And it was really hard to maintain. It was really easy to get confused in all the variable names, or if they changed this, you know, column header, then I'd have to change the variable name and it affected code, and it just turned into a maintenance nightmare. And so what I ended up doing was kind of putting it into a component and having it go through an object. And so instead of dealing with kind of this kind of scenario, this is using a collection, I end up using, I use this one, where I separated. So here you know, my file path, check for existence, I create an importer, I declare the columns that I want to import. So this is the name in the file. This is the name that I want to reference it through an object, and I declare the type of the variable that I want it to be. So it's able to detect dates, it's able to detect numbers, and automatically create objects based on it. So I'm just going to run it so I can show you.
I like that registration aspect of it, where it won't matter where the column is found.
Yeah.
You know, and you can handle the, you can rename that column at will.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure, definitely. It's more declarative, and it's like in this case, you know, it's basically 7 lines of code to load a file into an object. So then here I've got my object, I have my length, and I'm able to, the actual import object is actually where the imported data lives. I can see all the column headers that were in the original file. So if I need to do any existence checks, I can check to see if the actual column headers exist in that collection. What this does is it allows me to hide the concept of the actual import. So I've got preparing my, you know, transitioning the file into an object or a collection, and then processing it. So it's able to separate it. If I should look at the files, hold on for a sec.
It's once you have to deal with a lot of these import files, it's easily apparent how handy a tool like this would be, because so many of the files, just the variability and the errors that pop up in the files just can be a nightmare. This can you know, take a lot of time, especially if you're trying to go into Excel and fix things or something like that. Massage the files before you import them into the application. It can eat up your whole day.
Yeah, and particularly if you have to deal with, like this original example, it's really easy to deal with tab delimited, because tab delimited is really limited on what it supports. But when you're dealing with comma delimited, you can have that's valid, right? Like now I've got, sorry,
Can you make the font there bigger a little bit?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
No, I can't. Oh, here, I'll just do this. Sorry. So you can have embedded quotes. You can have embedded new line characters within the actual file. And so this is one single line. So to go through all of that parsing and stuff, and if you're having to write that importer for each import, it becomes extremely complicated. So let me run that.
Now, what size of files have you been able to handle, or is it sort of, does it scale nicely when you start working with gargantuan files?
Yeah, there's definitely a cost. What have I done here? Oh, that's why. There's definitely a cost for the processing. I don't have a performance requirement. It doesn't have to be very, very performant because it's all happening in the background. Mm-hmm. So it's okay for that. But you get the benefit from basically it's easier to code.
Right.
So like here, I've got my embedded quotes and my embedded return now that I've coded the file correctly. It's a lot of work to manage that within. So the declare columns is very straightforward. I'm just capturing information about the column header and adding it to a definitions object. Is that big enough? I should probably make that bigger. There we go. Within the loader itself, I've got a couple of utility methods that I'm using. And this is what that other component is for, where it checks to see if it's a CSV file or it checks to see if it's a tab delimited file. So based on whether it's comma delimited or not, I'll process the file rows differently. Basic existings checks, open up the file. This is a utility that I wrote. It's old. I've had it for probably going on 20 years. It's particularly useful if you're dealing with non-SSDs, so it's less of an issue now, but I was running into an issue where I was trying to consume a couple of bytes or 10 bytes or small amount of lines, and hitting the disk so many times, it was very impactful. But there's some extra utility functions that I get out of it, so I still continue using it, so I can ask for the end of line character. So I don't care if it comes from Mac, Windows, Linux, so I have a line feed, carriage return line feed, or just the carriage return. I can process the file and it's just able to grab it. I can fetch the CSV line, tab delimited, it comes back in arrays. I loop through, and because I know the columns are not necessarily in the positions that I expect them to be in, so I'm just going through and test it and get all the positions, and then I process each of the rows. And this is where it's fetching their data as a row data, and then going through and doing any sort of conversions. So part of the nice thing about the tool is that if I want a value to come across as Boolean, I can basically have coded what is true. So it's yes, Y, true, or a 1, then that'll always come across as a true value. Otherwise, it'll go as a false value.
Ooh, that's
automatically
nice.
Conversion of numbers. And this is the big one for me, is dates. We get dates in various formats. So this one is supporting basically month, day, year, month, date, then 2-digit year. And it goes through and if it recognizes the date, great, it converts it. Otherwise, it gets a non-date, basically a null date. And this does the ISO date, which is the 4-digit year, month, day, day.
It'd be interesting to put some of that in the configuration, like what represents a Boolean. I mean, in the end, I guess other languages and, who knows what else could represent a Boolean true, but, to be able to pass that into the component to say, well, this is a special configuration that I'm looking for.
Yeah, for sure. And I've thought about having a callback. So you could say, well, if you're getting this column, just do a callback, and then it can determine what the value is going to be. So
That'd be cool.
And because of that, formats. Right. So this file, this column, and this is all anonymized data, so it's not real data. I have this one-time consent date, one-time consent, yes, no. So here in this case, I'm asking it as a Boolean, but I'm also asking it as a text.
That's cool.
Birth date as well. So birth date, you know, date of birth as string is text and also is date. So I'm able to load the column multiple times. I'm just running. This is a bigger file. It takes a little bit longer.
You know, with a, I think with instead of a callback, you could even use a just pass in a formula with the column declaration.
Yeah.
And then run the formula on each of the values that it's receiving to massage the value into the expected type.
Yeah. Yeah. So then there's the, you know, the true value. It's a yes was there and is able to convert the date. And then this actually just showing that this is a column that doesn't exist in the file. So it's coming in as a null. Because I've found, particularly with tab delimited, and if they go through Excel does not, it doesn't guarantee that the number of columns is the same across all rows. You could have rows with extra, you know, blank values or missing values depending on if the row's been touched or how it's been added in there. So you need to be able to handle that it's missing a column. Yeah. And then what this does, and because I'm trying to think about ways to have testable code. Doing file processing is very difficult to test because you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. It's also is very time consuming to manage that. So what I'm able to do is do something like this. I can have a routine, which is like, this is the fetch data routine. And all it does is grab the file based on the path that you give it, and it loads it into an object. So this is testable. I can take up a number of files and just go through and make sure I process the columns based on what's there. And if I wanted to add more error checking, like ensuring that only those columns are there or that they exist or not, then it's easy enough to do. Now what I've got now is my code that actually processes what I've imported is now isolated from the concept of importing. So if I want to test this, I can just manually create this import object and then stuff it to this method, and I'm able to test the code to make sure it's able to handle the various scenarios I need to handle, which is very nice. I've used this in a few places. It's quite good. And the way with the collections, it's really easy to process individual rows. It's something I really like. I've used this a lot now, and it's very handy, especially when you have big bulks of things. Is there any questions on any of this?
It's nice that you know, all of the you can definitely see within the load to collection method, you know, how much is happening behind the scenes, and you know, using the component, obviously you wouldn't need to deal with that. And yeah, for anyone, a consumer of this component, you know, it's all abstracted and it's auto magic, which is something that'll be really wonderful to be able to take advantage of through the open source community, to say, you know, well, I need something that's very robust that can handle different kind of error scenarios within importing text files, text data and whatnot. And, you know, not even have to worry about those kind of issues. It's just hours, days worth of savings. Yeah,
for sure. And then
one of my clients gets a lot of files from vendors, different vendors of item data, and they get the same data every month. And it's amazing how many different formats they'll put it in, this, even the same company, you know, month to month, their column headings change. Slightly, you know, slight differences in there. And so we've had to do something similar to this because every time we get it, the columns are changing. The other thing we found is that a lot of people who go through Excel, sometimes they get numbers formatted. So if you've got something that's a big, long ID number and they get it in there, it'll get formatted in scientific notation. And then they save it and it comes over to you as scientific notation and you can't get back to the original number.
Oof.
Yeah, you have to convert it. Luckily I haven't had to deal with scientific notation issues. I do have a lot of things that go through Excel, and Excel does some very crazy things to files.
It can also munch on Unicode as well, depending on the Excel version.
Yeah, the file buffer, I've had to deal with some of that stuff where because of that, because there isn't necessarily a bomb in the file, I've had to jump through hoops to try and figure out file formats, the Unicode, and what it is. I ran into a situation where there was no bomb, and when I was loading in parts of the file, because the file is large, I have to do it in pieces, which is file buffer handles that. And it turned out that it was cutting a character in half.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've had to add this extra cut stuff to detect if the last couple of bytes might be part of a character and to try and load the rest. It's a real pain in the tush. I can't count on being able to use something like a document to text to load everything because the files can be quite large. So I've had to manage that, and it is a real pain when you have to deal with Unicode. Now with memory getting so cheap and stuff, it's moving more and more towards just loading the whole file in, but I'm not there yet.
Dani, I have a question about the dates.
What's the question?
Well, I saw you covered the US notation of the dates, but I have a similar application here that reads in text files, and the dates that are there are actually come in a variety of formats where you have either day, month, year, or you have the American notation, which is month, day, year. But then what also happens is they put something like August AUJ 17 and the year in it. So there are a number of ways that that date is inserted, and I wondered if there is some mechanism to identify that format and extract the date from it.
So right now, I've only had to deal with this. The customers are in North America, or in the States, so they're all the day, year. In Canada, we use day, month, year, and month, day, year, which is joy to try and work that out. But
okay.
so right now, I just got it these ones formatted, coded in. If you're in that situation, either add another formatter in there and detect it, or else just have the date come in as a string, and then when you're processing it, you do that extra layer of detection. Sometimes, yeah, you just can't. You don't know what people are going to give you. Luckily, we haven't had to deal with where we're getting date formats that are not detectable. So like if you're having intermingling of day, month, year, and month, day, year, it's really hard to determine with confidence that you have one format or the other.
Well, and that's, this is available on Git. So if there's customizations like that, small customizations for changing the date format, the expected date format, it's the source code is available to do so. Yeah,
and my hope, particularly with the 4D open source, which is why I put it on open source rather than on my own Git repository, was that a lot of us has solved the problem in unique ways, but there's also a lot of commonality, and it'd be nice if we can start sharing some of this code, leveraging code, and just kind of go from there. Particularly this import is ripe to turn into a class. I'm not using R3 yet. I'm still on 18.2, so I can't write it and test it and know that it's going to work production level. But I think, you know, that's definitely in the future. It also lends itself to just a level of robustness. You know, knowing that it's working in production, knowing that it's being used by other people, and also being able to do some testing. That's also, especially with classes, the idea of being able to do automated, like a JUnit kind of concept, potentially becomes viable with the 4D classes, which is quite interesting.
I've got a isDate method that breaks down the date into different parts and then looks at them, and it looks at both abbreviated month names and full month names. And it also tries to determine whether you're doing month, day, year, or day, month, year by looking for things that are greater than 12 and figuring, okay, if it's greater than 12, it can't be a month. And so that kind of thing runs through, and then it comes back and it says, is it a date or not? And if it is a date, it puts it all together for you. And that winds up being helpful in case you get mixed dates like that.
Actually, in addition, I do a regex check to see if it is an acceptable date format.
Yeah, regex is always handy for that kind of thing. You know, the determining the structure of a text.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot of regex expressions out there on the web.
Yes, there are.
The Webernets.
The Webernets, yeah. You know, I've obviously coded this for my own needs. I use this. This is copied from one of my bigger components. I've started to move towards smaller components. I think that's better. It's a little bit more isolated. I find that once I write code and I've used it for, you know, a month or two, I rarely change the component. I only add new things to it, which is quite nice. Within the file folder utilities, there's a couple of useful utilities. The ability to detect if it's a CSV file, a JPEG file, PNG, or tab delimited. I use those quite a bit, actually. Which is, yeah, especially if you're dealing with a file from a customer and they give you a .txt file, it could be just about be anything.
Right. Yeah, for a very controlled environment, there's you know, the 4D language itself has some great offerings. You know, the new file object, the file library module. You know, you can slurp up the text and then use split string with the line endings, and then split string on each line for the fields and whatnot.
There's nothing in here that's using any of the Artine version, the 18 art versions at all. As long as it's the 4D version supports collections and I don't know if anybody's used test-driven development, but this method, I used test-driven development against it. It was quite an interesting experiment to go through, and it turned out completely different than I thought it would go to. But yeah, so this routine goes through, takes a line of text, and basically parses it all out. It deals with you know, quoted, embedded quotes, the embedded carriage returns, or line feeds, which could be just about anything, and it handles all of that and puts things back together. So this is a very useful routine. And then there's a corresponding one for tab delimited. But tab delimited, there is no escaping. You basically have your end of line and you have your tabs, and that's what it is. This fetch SFV line also supports the separators. I don't know if you know this, but it's possible to have something other than a comma as a separator, particularly in Europe, where comma is a special character for them. So sometimes you'll see the line would start, like the file will start with separate equals semicolon and then goes on from there. So that's saying that the CSV has a semicolon as a separator. So this method handles that as well, which is very handy. So yeah, it handles all of that stuff.
Nice.
I've gone through and tried to find some test files like on the internet that they use for testing, and it's all the ones I've been able to find, it's been able to consume and go through. So it works well for North American files for sure. And I have not run into any issues for quite a while. So it handles all of that stuff, which is part of the reason why, you know, at this level, I just need to fetch a line or fetch a line, you know, depending on CSV or tab delimited. It would not be hard to extend into other formats. You just have to have a way of reading it and turning it into an array. It goes from there. And as support, like these are the only formats I needed. I don't have like pictures or objects or anything like that, but it's possible to be able to parse that information and manage it accordingly. So if you got a picture and you know it's base 64 or something, you could just, you know, put it back and turn it into a picture. I guess not into an object. Yeah. And what's interesting, and like I'm not using classes yet, but I could create a class in theory for the file importer, and then inside my, you know, let's say I got student data and I want to import, and I've got a student data processor. Well, I could have one of the objects inside that class is a reference to the importer itself. So then I could, you know, pass in the importer that I want to use for the processor to load the file, which means then you basically I can mock it, and then it's testable. I don't know. It's one of the things I'll be playing with when I can get into the V3 and higher, hopefully in the fall. Any other questions? It's really fundamentally pretty simple, but it compartmentalizes it, and then you can use the components and not worry about it working or not working. You just deal with, so in this case, this is the code really that becomes the most important code. And the actual thing that where you specifying the columns becomes really easy to maintain.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really great example of what we can expect to see a little bit more of in the 4D open source community, and how useful this tool is. It may seem very basic, like we said earlier, but it's just an enormous time saver for having to work your way through, you know, little glitches in files here and there. You know, I really encourage anyone else that has a handy library, a well-tested, you know, a very robust library of functionality like this. I mean, it's we're still finding our way through what the best way to share code with the. I mean, we know it's going to be in Git with the open source efforts and whatnot, but you know, definitely reach out to the open source group and see if there's any way to go ahead and share the library and make it available to everybody. And inevitably, the promise of open source and whatnot is that you get more eyes in there, more eyes on the code to help work through problems that you may not even know that you have, and everyone benefits. So thanks, Dani, for going ahead and sharing these two repositories initially, and I'm sure many more to come.
Yeah, and then this is one that Kirk did a little while back. It was turned one of Canon's stuff into a class or something similar, anyways. And if anybody has any ideas on how to kind of to make this work, or functionality or something that they would like to see on how this operates. Right now, I think the next step is to create a repository with a curated list, and then just start collecting links to other people's code that they published, and just a way of collecting it and making it easier for people to find. I think that's really what would be nice, is just to find a way to find. Canon had an interesting piece that he talked about where, you know, once you've got code that you've downloaded, then how do you keep your own projects that are using some of those methods up to date? So this is an interesting thing. I think that it's NPM-ish like, so I don't know. It's to be interesting to see how everything evolves, but and if anybody wants to be involved in the 4D open source stuff, just let me, Kirk, or Guy or Canon know. The goal is to make it a community effort, and ideally get to the point where people are willing to contribute to other repositories that they don't own. Like the timestamp is a good example. It's, you know, should just write it once and then it's done. And then, you know, maybe we can convince 4D to take some of these ones that everybody really, really likes and turn it into a 4D utils kind of library or something that then is just part of 4D, and it just gets shared along with everything else. But whatever, that's the
Right.
future.
Yeah, and or have some part in helping to manage the packages, you know, having a native 4D package manager for integrating with these kind of components from some sort of centralized source, like the 4D open source community.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. Okay.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of really exciting, as we've all seen, exciting new features and strategies and approaches in the 4D language rapidly coming out, and sharing some of this long tested and you know, this code that covers a lot of the exceptions that you'll see out there. Sharing that in the open source community will hopefully make it possible to help other people to migrate it, do the work of migrating it to classes, and you know, moving it into a more of a project-based approach and that kind of thing, to help share the effort in that regard. You know, this is all new to the 4D community, the classes and the project mode and whatnot, and so I'm sure there's certainly some of us that have more experience already with them. But yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing, Dani.
You're welcome. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me or put questions on the forum. I watch that.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen back again. And yeah, so anybody have questions, Dani can be reached. Yeah, on the forum, obviously, LinkedIn. Check out the GitHub links here for the 4D open source repositories that were used in this demo. Or reach out to Open Road Development. Just a mention about our next meeting. Our schedule can be found at 4dmethod.com/schedule. Our next meeting, as we've mentioned a little bit, in about timestamps and classes and whatnot. Tim Nevels will be showing off his own class for basically handling timestamps, and it's an effort to replicate the JSON library for handling date times and timestamps and whatnot. And it's just it's a really neat thing to see. It's very well commented, very well orchestrated, and it's going to be extremely instructional, I think, for most of us to see how these new coding capabilities can come into play and be taken advantage of. If you've got something you'd like to show off, definitely reach out to 4DMethod. Thanks again to everybody at 4D and Dani and everyone for taking part in the meeting. Feedback is always appreciated, as well as support. Check out the Patreon link here if you'd like to take it one step forward for supporting the group. And beyond that, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. We appreciate it.
Okay. All
Thank
right.
you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.